just got to figure out the right way to, stay in your lane and stay cool and keep things calm. And when people get excited, try and help them with that.
Okay.
So while that doesn't help me a lot because so there's small pauses, but I try not to again spend too many hours. Keep it as relaxed as possible, and then when you check out, you need to check out. So I do like to tell people that are on the team, when you drive up the road into the resort, you're on, but when you drive the other way, you're off.
As dads, we have a ton of priorities that pull us in many different directions. We are not alone in this, and because of that, we should share what works and what doesn't work. We need to be our best selves first. Then we can be the best husbands and dads that we can be. The best way to share these tips is through the Ambitious Life podcast.
All right, so through the past year of the pandemic and everything like that, you and I were chatting about all things from fitness to finance to also just, how we stay focused and stay productive. And you came up with this idea, which was the three, legs to a stool. And as we kind of started talking about that and everything, I kind of ran with it and came up with 3 pillars approach, which is mental fitness, physical fitness, and financial fitness. So that's how I wanted to attack this podcast with you. And of course, I needed to start with someone who came up with the idea. And the best place to start was with you, Dad. So without further ado, why don't you introduce yourself and who you are, where you are, and what you do?
Righto. Well, Mike DeGroff, and currently living in Truckee, California. I've been here for 10 years, and I'm currently working as the Senior Vice President of Resort Services at Squaw Valley and Alpine Meadows, which is one of the 14 ski areas that are owned by the Alterra Mountain Resort company based in Denver, Colorado. And I've been working in the ski industry for a long, long time and still doing it.
Awesome. And go into resort services. I know what that means, but I don't know if anybody else would necessarily know exactly what resort services mean.
Yeah. Typically in the ski industry, resort services means a variety of they are revenue and cost centers. So in my case, both in my former position at a different ski resort and then here at Squaw Valley Alpine Meadows, it includes food and beverage, rental and retail services, the commercial village, and the commercial tenants and the oversight of that.
So that sounds like a lot is on your plate, which actually leads us into one of the questions question is always top of mind for me. And that's how do you stay productive? How do you complete the task throughout the day? What does your productivity hacks look like?
Yeah. So I'm lucky to have a pretty strong team, a portion of which I've inherited and a portion of which I've hired in the last 10 years since I've been at Squaw and Alpine. And from a productivity standpoint, it's really more about how the team delivers our products and how the team delivers our services. Tasks. My tasks are to ensure that the team is supported and has the resources that they need to be able to carry out their business units, combined with their ability to then manage their direct reports, which are typically either at the director level or the manager level. And that's where the work actually happens. Now, we all pitch in from time to time, and especially during the pandemic. So most of us at the senior level are in and about the village and the mountain to ensure that the guests are being treated the way we expect, combined with doing, in some cases, kind of menial tasks. But at the same time, the pandemic has kind of changed things where we have a reduced operations, and it's kind of all hands on deck, especially when we're busy and specifically weekends.
Now that makes perfect sense. And leadership is super important for kind of the top down, and then making sure that all the important tasks that need to happen throughout the day actually do happen. And what does goal setting look like? Is it a 5-year goal that then you kind of backtrack from there?
It's a combination of things. It starts with long-term goals. While we may talk about long-term being 2, 3 to 5 years, for the most part, it tends to be a little bit shorter than that because things tend to change in our industry quickly. So we end up, we try and focus on the long term and do some strategic planning in that regard. They tend to be more like in the 2-year range for long term, maybe stretch into a 3rd year. But goal setting typically occurs on an annual basis with a fairly large group of people, where we sit down and takes 2 or 3 sessions to go through with the senior team combined with their direct reports, about 30 people usually. And we define the top 3 or 4 goals for our resort, which can be in some cases modeled off of other resorts because there's some commonality amongst the resorts and some best practices that are shared. But for the most part, we figure out, again, 3 to 5 goals that we know we can get focused on, that the whole team works on. So they're a bit lofty, but they're not too lofty where it only can be worked on by senior level people. And therefore, it centers around guests, employees, and money. So what does the guest need? What do employees need? And how can we be financially viable? So then we distill that down from the company level. We distill that down to specific departmental or division, division being resort services, department being rental, retail, lodging, food and beverage. So then we have specific goals, typically annual only, while there's some long-term planning associated with the bigger departments. We have a fairly robust food and beverage group that has restaurants all over the resort. So we tend to get a bit more strategic depending on the size of the business. And then they in turn have their goals and then specific manager goals that align with those department goals. And that all rolls up together.
That's a lot to coordinate. So how do you keep your team, or how do you keep your direct reports, and then they keep their team accountable to those goals?
We have an annual performance process that each of the year-round managers have a specific set of goals, the goals I described earlier. Typically,
Okay.
there's a little bit of personal goals in there combined with their department's goals, and there's some alignment there. And that's in a document, their annual performance review. And the good ones pay attention to it. The ones that aren't quite as good, sometimes those goals get lost in the shuffle during the year. But the idea for me, and to go back to one of your original questions about, how do I stay on task? How do I take care of all of those things? For the most part, I make sure that people are trying to deliver on their objectives.
Yeah, perfect. That's great insight into how it kind of works from the top down, and things like that. So being a little bit more specific about you and things like that, I'm always curious. I have my own mindfulness and meditation practice and things like that, and I'm always curious. I sit and just meditate 10 to 20 minutes every single day. Do you have something like that? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. I to be frank, I don't know exactly what meditation looks or feels like, but
No worries.
but for me, either A, at my age, or B, at the stage of my career, balance is pretty important. And I try to stay as even keel as possible. So don't get, I like to say, not too hot, not too cold. And to be able to do that, you need to build certain things into your work day. We work 6 or more days a week in the wintertime. We're not quite as crazy as we once were in terms of being attached to our phones, round the clock. We've started to distribute responsibilities where certain people are on call and certain people are not on call, so that that you can then relax. And the pandemic has added a new element of stress to everyone's work that has caused two things. One, it actually has slowed things down and made people a bit more respectful. But at the same time, there's the stress of the pandemic, the stress that has on our business, which is significant, combined with the anxiety that many people feel. So you just got to figure out the right way to stay in your lane and stay cool and keep things calm. And when people get excited, try and help them with that. I do have a little stand on my desk that was a little card that was given to me by a yoga instructor at one point, and it's a sunset picture that says pause on it. So while that doesn't help me a lot, because they're small pauses, but I try not to again spend too many hours. Keep it as relaxed as possible, and then when you check out, you need to check out. So I do like to tell people that are on the team, when you drive up the road into the resort, you're on, but when you drive the other way, you're off.
That's perfect. And that was something I was just curious about. And so how do you stay? Because one more thing here, when you're saying too hot, too cold, is it just kind of in that moment where you feel yourself going too hot or you feel yourself being too cold? Is it just a discussion with yourself that just, hey, be more even keel?
Yeah. Not so much. I mean, I suppose there are times where you have to catch yourself, to just weave in a little bit of, physical health as it relates to mental health. I stopped drinking coffee years ago, and caffeine did have an impact on me. And I remember very clearly, a boss that we had a lot of respect for each other. And he said, he never told me to lay off the coffee, but there was one meeting where he said, "Hey, slow down a little bit. These people can't keep up with you. So just let it come out of them rather than push it on them. Pull it out of them slowly. And even if you know the answer, let them see if they can find the answer." And so through that process, you end up calming down. I do think that there were a few times where, the caffeine got me a little extra excited. And when I had the opportunity to stop drinking caffeine, that helped me. But just to dial into that question a little bit deeper in terms of not too hot, not too cold, it's a little bit easier for me in my position because I get to be boss if I want to be. And so I can actually get a little hot, get a little firm, get a little stern if I want. And there's a time and a place for that. So that helps a lot. Not everyone has that luxury, but you just find a balance, and it just feels right. And once you find that pocket, once you find that sweet spot, you just figure out ways to stay in it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's where, meditation and mindfulness right now is a huge topic, but you found the same place without necessarily sitting there for 20 minutes and, trying to control your thoughts. So
there are times where I might be staring into space and someone will say to me, and especially my wife, "Hey, what are you thinking about?" And while there might be some thoughts going on, they're so random and so far out or so bland that it's kind of like, well, nothing. I'm not
yeah,
thinking about anything right now. or trying to not think about anything, I suppose that would be my form of meditation.
Perfect. That's great. So one more thing here, and then we are going to move into the kind of physical fitness, because I want to dig into that a little bit more. But what are you curious about right now?
Mm. Well, I guess, certainly what the future holds a little bit. Um, you always think about the future, and at one point during my career and my life, it was more, maybe even a little bit more dreamlike. I've always had the ability to work hard, and my career progressed satisfactorily. So I never really, while I was ambitious, I am ambitious, not in an overly overt way. And so, so my curiosity today is about, how I can move on to the next stage of my life, and really have some fun with it. But when I talk about fun, I've actually coined a phrase that I've seen actually other companies use now. It's called serious fun. And there's there's a certain amount of business that actually is just fun. Um, but you have to be serious about it, because otherwise, if you're not successful, you don't get to have the fun.
Yeah.
So so I'm curious about, how I can apply that to the next stage, and especially when it comes to finances, because there's a lot going on in the financial world these days. And anyway, maybe we'll dive into that a little later.
Yeah, we're definitely going to dive into that. So kind of, thinking about the physical, again, if we are strong physically, you mentioned you stopped drinking coffee, which then probably slowed you down a little bit because you're not thinking so fast and things like that. What do you do for physical activity? What is that? Do you have a routine? What does that look like?
Yeah, I've never been much for a routine exerciser. It's not something that I just I've never gravitated to it. And I've been trying to actually rack my brain lately on why that is. And especially when I see other people, and specifically my wife. I mean, she has a very strict routine, and I don't remember half the exercises that I've learned. So I mean, I've tried to have a golf routine that is a combination of stretching, a little bit of yoga, and maybe a little bit of exercise. But I've tried to, over time, just make sure that I'm lucky enough to be outside. My job is based in my office, but I can go for a walk anytime I want. I can go skiing anytime I want. We actually just took up cross country skiing to be able to fill in some of the holes, in terms of exercise. So it's always been a varied thing. Mountain bike, road bike, at one point inline skating, at one point windsurfing, um, a tiny little bit of swimming, because I enjoy being in the lake, but I wouldn't call my swimming exercise. But bicycling probably is the closest I've ever gotten to some kind of routine. But that's been a little bit harder, just over time. So a little bit of everything is maybe the best way to answer it, but not as much of a routine as there should be, but certainly enough exercise to stay active.
Yeah, I mean, you're staying active every day, which is super important, but not necessarily, hey, I got to hit X, Y, and Z at this time. It's just
Yeah,
as the moment strikes.
yeah.
And what does your diet or your overall diet look like?
Overall diet, I like to think that it's pretty darn good. I've never had it evaluated, with the possible exception of we have a healthcare program at Squaw Alpine, which is the Altera medical program, that has a health component to it, and you can actually track your practices, and specifically the food that you eat. So I'd like to focus on whole foods. We do a certain amount of cooking, but I wouldn't say we overcook things. I try not to add too much sauce to it, if you will. So more, again, just, I can have, carrots and cheese and crackers and call it a meal. And that's developed over time. At some point, we're all brainwashed to think that we had to have 3 square meals a day. And to be honest, I think that was, to use Joe Biden's term, that was malarkey. I think, anyway.
Yeah.
Never talked to a doctor about it, but regardless, food obviously is fuel and creates energy. And I don't seem to need, I know that even in talking to you about protein and such, I don't feel like I need maybe as much protein as other folks. We eat very little meat, so probably once, maybe twice a week. And then we fill it in with a lot of other stuff. So lots of fruits and vegetables. Too many tortilla chips. I know for a fact it's too many tortilla chips.
Well, I
That's
think
the
that,
only thing that I think might be overdone.
yeah, and I think that to your point about, protein amounts or, dairy or whatever it might be, a lot of these agendas have been pushed by, big corporations, and they filter down. And, we had the food guide pyramid that came in the, the late 70s, early 80s, that, hey, you got to eat this many grains and this, all these different things. And so in reality, the best thing to do is test and go, okay, what do I feel the best on?
Yeah.
And I also think that when it comes to any conversation about, you threw out tortilla chips there's a part of living life too. So if you enjoy chips and salsa, like I know we both do, then it's, it's like, well, I don't know if I really want to live a life without chips and salsa every once in a while or a few days a week.
or find the healthiest chip.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Because there is quite a variation in what you can buy, and obviously you can buy baked versus fried, and there's ways to get around it. The interesting part for chips or snacks in general is they all tend to have about the same number of calories in it. It's kind of interesting. I'm not sure why that is.
I've always thought of that or looked at that as well, where most bags of chips, no matter what kind they are, about 130 to 150 calories per serving. And so I think that that's just one of the things that has become standard in our lives. Now, when we think about, you've obviously over years refined how you eat, what you eat, the physical activity piece. Is there a point where you feel like, okay, maybe I'm not feeling as energetic, or I'm feeling off, and then you go, okay, it's because of what I've eaten or because of how I exercise? Do you ever feel that?
There isn't anything that I eat that makes me feel different or weird in that regard. So no, I don't. What I've found, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, is I don't have to have a meal. I can actually have, I have a bowl of what I call nuts and seeds, granola with fruit in the morning, with almond or cashew milk. And then my lunch a lot of times is a peanut butter and honey sandwich on some very grainy bread. But other times I'll, I get hungry after 3 hours. So there are a lot of times where I'll have 3 small meals a day and then dinner. Typically eat dinner earlier. I know that eating too close to bedtime is not something that seems good to me. But then combined, it seems like the 2 most important things in terms of energy level for me are getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And the more I exercise, the better I sleep.
And you,
and then
go ahead.
So the food ends up being third in line.
Yep. And
it starts with exercise, then sleep, and then food provides a little bit of fuel or some enjoyment.
Absolutely. And you teed up kind of my next question that I'm just super curious about is, sleep. And, you said 7 to 8 hours and things like that. How do you wind down to go to bed? Or do you just bounce out of bed in the morning? What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, on the getting into bed, I tend to listen to music. If I even feel like I need to wind down, I don't have any trouble falling asleep. It's rare now that I have any trouble falling asleep. Um, but my sleep patterns are, again, I can sleep 8 hours when I know I'm tired and don't have a lot to think about, and I've exercised that day. Sleeping 8 hours is not that difficult. Um, I did find something a few years back. I googled sleep history or something like that, and what came up was, way back when electricity had not been discovered yet, um, people slept when it was dark, and they were awake when the sun was out. And if you think about it, that makes some sense. And I don't sleep well during the day. I sleep much better when it's dark. So, but the second thing that was part of that interesting article that I read was that most people during that time period, because it was typically dark for 12 hours, obviously it rotates, right, between 8 and 12 hours, depending on the time of year, and where you live, obviously. But anyway, if it's dark for 12 hours, people slept for 6 hours, got up, did a little something, had a little something to eat, went back to bed and slept another 6 hours. So we've been conditioned, just like the food pyramid, we have to sleep 7 or 8 hours. And while that doesn't sound like a bad idea, I wonder what it would be like. She asked about curiosity. I'm curious about what it'd be like to sleep, because I can sleep 6 hours solid, no problem.
Yep.
But in that next sleep cycle, I guess you're supposed to have 5 sleep cycles a night that are between an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half each. And that gets you to your 7.5 or 8 hours. So that fifth cycle from time to time is a little bit difficult, but again, it's impacted by what you eat, and it's impacted by what you have going on, the amount of stress that you have, and it's impacted by the amount of exercise that you have.
Absolutely. And has that changed over time? As you know, I've young kids and they like to interrupt my sleep cycle. So has that
Yeah.
been the same throughout, or it's progressed, or has it changed over time, I guess?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm trying to remember over time when the kids were younger, having been reminded of it now with grandkids, is that what it was like during that stretch when the kids were young. And I don't have a big recollection, a strong recollection of the lack of sleep that occurs during when the kids are young. I don't remember it. Now, part of that may have been because Diane was able to take a few years off when we had 2 kids to uh, take care of the kids. And I can't remember how long the stretch was. It seemed like it was 3 or 4 years. So that's maybe why I don't remember quite as much, and the impact on me was a bit less. But yes, it changes over time. And as the family grew up and my career started to take off a bit more, there were stretches where I don't remember how much I slept, but I was very motivated at work. So it probably was, 6 hours. And I can remember getting to work at what I now call dark 30 on many days. And they were relatively long days. So there was a lot of work. There was a lot of work thrown in, and a lot of play thrown in, a lot of activities thrown in, a lot of family stuff thrown in. So sleep was never really a big problem. Of course, there were times during especially busy stretches where you have plenty to think about and you wake up and you think about it. Anyway, my new routine when that happens is I watch a little TV, and
Okay.
And even though you're not supposed to do that, it seems to have no impact on me. And then I try and keep track of how much I slept going into that cycle and how much I slept coming out of that cycle. And when I think I got close to 7.5, 8 hours, I feel good about that. And I convince myself during the day, you're not tired, you're okay.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of just kind of between the years, where you just convince yourself like,
Yeah.
I'm not as tired as I might feel. One last question on this.
Yeah.
And what about water? What's your kind of, a lot of us you don't drink coffee anymore. And then, so what does your water intake look like? Is it something you think about?
Water, anytime the team took a water break, you'd have water, so on and so forth. Back in the day, we drank salt water, and that was terrible. But anyway, that was way before Gatorade. But anyway, so I would like to say, I may be wrong about this, but I would like to say that water is important for some and maybe less important for others. I do know, it's interesting, I was just thinking this today as I picked up a free water bottle that I wanted to have in my office. And it's like, you know what? Why don't I start putting some raw ginger and some lemon in cold water and make my own ginger lemon water? And maybe wean myself. I drink a lot of club soda, and according to my kids, that's not that good for you. I don't know why that is. The explanation I've been given is not that great. But regardless, I do have kind of a scratchy throat, and maybe while I enjoy the bubbles, maybe the bubbles are actually irritating my throat. That's very possible. So interestingly enough, I'm going to try a few new water regimens, but I probably won't drink as much water as some of the doctors or some of the kids say I should.
Yeah, it's I have my water bottle, and I try to drink as much as possible. Now, I also drink a ton of club soda, and then Topo Chico is my new favorite drink as well. It's something different. And then of course, certain nights of the week, then there's wine or beer in there as well. And so there's an argument that we should be hydrated. Now, again, are we not getting as hydrated from club soda or whatever? Who knows? And I think that the key here, that the overarching theme, and I think this is going to lead us into the final part of this conversation, is it's a lot of just experience and what works for you. And there isn't any big like health things or any big anxiety. There's no reason to really change things because you've slowly chipped away over time and you're perfectly happy with how you feel and everything like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So kind of going into the financial fitness piece and everything like that, it's, you alluded to it earlier, there's a lot of different myths and thoughts of what you should and shouldn't do and things like that. So what is a common myth about budgeting or investing that you've just come to realize is just really silly?
I don't think there's anything silly about budgeting and financial wellness. I do think that there's, to answer your question most contemporarily, like right now, in doing more and more reading about financial analysts and financial trends, there's a lot of people out there that are trying to sell us stuff. And it finally dawned on me, while there might be a little nugget or two in their research, what they really want you to do is to buy a subscription. And then I did the math on those subscriptions, and I went, aha, I think I can unsubscribe that newsletter. But anyway, so I think that the silliest myth right now is that you need some of these knuckleheads on TV or in your email to tell you what to do, because they're probably not as smart as they say they are.
Yeah, fair enough. What have you always budgeted, or is that something, with your personal finances, is that something you've always done or something you've just kind of chipped away over time?
I think the best way to answer the question is that it was not something that I was taught to do. It was not something that I was trained to do outside of work. And a combination of a frugal influence, not from me, but from others, combined with the practice of budgeting at work, built a foundation that led me to understand how important budgeting is and how important tracking is and how important the data associated with the data and the analysis are so important so that you know what's going on. And to be honest, without it, you're lost. You're just completely lost. So it developed over time is another way to answer the question. And now to the point where I have to have it. You just have to have, well, it doesn't matter whether you're refinishing a table in the garage or whether you're laying out your next 5 years. You got to have some basis written down that allows you to start on a path, even though you typically, you almost always adjust the path. But if you don't know which path to take to start, you end up on the wrong path.
Absolutely. I think that that's where a lot of, when you look at, smart goals and things like that, where you're staying accountable to this, there's also the point of, well, things are going to, things change and you need to adjust in real time and be flexible within a point, not flexible like, hey, I said I'm going to spend $5,000 a month and I feel like I should spend $7,000, not that kind of flexibility, but things pop up and that's why you should have emergency funds and contingencies. So there, I always like to say that we should save first and spend extra. Spend second, not spend extra. Is that something you subscribe to?
Absolutely. Yeah, it needs to become a way of life. And, whether you look at individuals, people that we know, or the government, you look at the, liberals versus conservative as it relates to fiscal policy. And conservatives, when it comes to money, conservatives are always better.
Yes, absolutely. And, there's the notion that we should pay ourselves first. And I think that a lot of times people, when we see those percentages that, hey, we should be putting 5% or 6% into our 401k or an investment account, people think that that's really hard to do. But really, once you just start doing it, then it's, or if you commit to it, where you put the 6% in or whatever the number you can do, then you kind of forget about it and then you build your budget after that.
Yeah, you need to understand and recognize your habits. And if your habits are a tad extravagant, what happened in 2008? Everybody that thought they needed 3 cars, a 3-car garage, and a bigger house, and their jobs just barely paid for it, and the banks would loan them money, found out that equation didn't work out so well. So this idea that you need a bigger house, you need more stuff, it's really easy at my age to look back and go, what the hell did I need that for? Whereas when you're in the moment, it's like, well, I have to have a new windsurfer, or I have to have a new this, or a new car, or whatever it is. And then when you start doing the math, I remember the first time I did the math on vehicles, a used vehicle versus a new vehicle, and so on and so forth. After buying and having cars for, call it 20 years, for the sake of argument, the math was the same. Didn't matter what you bought, didn't matter what you paid for it. It cost you $400 a month for the life of that vehicle. And so then all of a sudden you go, okay, well, that's what it costs to have a vehicle. How many of them do I really need? Anyway, so it all comes back to that budgeting and understanding the data and understanding your fiscal habits.
Absolutely. And I think that that was one of the kind of bigger questions that I was going to, ask, which you alluded to it a little bit with talking about, where you are now in life, think about, 20 years ago. What would you tell your younger self to set you up for a better position now?
Probably two things. One, to be a little bit more fiscally restrained or conservative, and to stick to the budget, if you will. We were pretty good at that even 20 years ago, but prior to that, maybe not quite as much. But then and then secondly, how not easy it is, but if you're careful, building wealth is not as hard as people think. But it starts with, to your point earlier, saving first, pay yourself first. And if you just start to do the math, right? You love Starbucks. Well, Starbucks costs you $4 every day. In fact, you might have even said this to me when we were both much younger. Said, well, if you take that $4 and you put that in the bank every day, obviously, 4 times 365, you do the math, and all of a sudden you realize how quickly you can actually save money. And it can be pennies, it can be dollars, but then all of a sudden you can start to figure out how to be smarter with that money. But if you never have your first dollar, you don't get to ever use it.
No, absolutely. That's a good point. I think that, again, we got to live our lives. And so, and that's the question of, okay, at Starbucks, do you need to go 7 days a week, or do you turn it into a once a week or once a month type thing? And, for me personally, I was looking at it like, I love cold brews. I just like the way they taste and everything. I started looking at them like, that's $4 or $5 every time you go there. And do you really, do you need to do that caffeine? Do you need that extra coffee?
Yeah.
Could you make it at home? You would probably have the argument that you don't need the coffee at all. And then also just looking at like, hey, if you were to just get drip coffee, that's half that, that's $2. You don't need the fancy lattes and things like that. So I think that the bigger theme here through this whole conversation really is that I've mentioned it multiple times now, where you just test and retest and really be aware of your actions and the decisions that you make and the consequences related to those.
Yep. Exactly.
So a couple last questions here, and we'll wrap this up. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you were thinking I was going to ask?
To be honest, no, because I didn't really think of it from that perspective, because I was going into this a bit blind and a bit organic. So no, I thought that we might talk a little bit more about financial health, but this whole concept of financial health, mental health, physical health, to be honest, I didn't really think about mental health that much over time, and certainly during my career and or within the family, if you will. But I started thinking about it when we start to build some team success goals. And it's really easy to say the financial goal for a department is $4 million in operating profit. And what are the tactics and objectives, sub-objectives that get us to that goal? That's pretty easy. It's also pretty easy to build the physical plant, just to apply physical well-being to the physical plant. The structure of how a business operates. Again, that's relatively easy. But what's not easy is determining the mental health of the team. And it was probably 15 years ago, certainly since I've been at school on Alpine. It's a little crazier in California than other places that I've lived. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of cars, people spend their parts of their day in traffic. They spend parts of their day in lines at the grocery store. There's just a lot of people in concentrated areas. It was not necessarily what I experienced in Northwest Colorado, but the idea that it feels like there's more stress. In addition to that, I came out here to help build an organization, a brand new organization with new ownership, and then in turn build up the products and services that to create more of a world-class resort. And we were building a lot of things. I mean, we built restaurants, we built yoga studios, we built ski shops, we built snowboard shops, and so again, build those first two, building the structure and growing the revenue in the GOP. While it's not easy, it was pretty straightforward. But ensuring that the team was healthy while you were in that growth spurt was not something that is usually baked into the success equation. It's really easy, and certainly in the financial industry, certainly in some of the financial districts in San Francisco or New York or wherever they might be, it's high pressure, it's high volume, it's high pressure, or at least I'm told. I've never obviously done it or lived there, but so to apply that to what we were doing, that pressure creates stress, and it's not uncommon for you to hit your financial goals. It's not uncommon to hit your growth goals in terms of the structure that you build, but it's also not uncommon to lose people, teammates. They can't handle it. They can't handle the stress. They can't handle the speed. They can't handle the growth. So all of a sudden, this mental health idea, and we're talking a lot about it right now because of the pandemic, because it's dragging on people. Obviously, the 4 years in the United States and the political climate of the previous administration, for a lot of people, whether they like to hear it or not, created a fair amount of stress. And then you throw the pandemic on top of that, the subsequent financial issues associated with the economy, and keeping the team together from a mental standpoint, from a mental health standpoint, is really much, much harder. So it's something that we talk about a lot now. So that's why it has to be all three. You could be really good at one, and if you're not good at the other two, you're not good. There's no balance, and you're not going to be as successful. You might be able to hit a home run every now and then. You might be able to make some money, but are you really going to have the life balance that people that are very content with their life and their family and their financial situation, being able to be content like that is that happy place, if you will.
Yep.
It's a neat place to be.
Absolutely. And I think that it's almost like generational, whereas in to your point, again, as all of this stuff is kind of piled on top of us, that, we have to combat it in different ways, and we're becoming more aware of all that and everything like that. And so I think that that's super important that you called that out. And I think this is a great place to wrap it up. And I have one more question, and we'll end it on this. If you had a billboard, what would you put on the billboard, and where would you put it?
Well, it'd be fun to have a bunch of billboards, and it'd be fun to have you be the only one that has billboards. and especially right now, the first thing that comes to mind is just be nice. Just everybody be nice, no matter what. But that's almost too grand or too kind of duh. It's really more about how can we help each other achieve, again, to go back to my previous thought about being content. How do we help more people get to that place and realize that it's not about more. It's about um, I guess just I mean the right balance of it, the right balance of everything. And I think a lot of people aren't built for that. I think people aren't, I remember having a pretty interesting discussion with a gal who was kind of a cousin of a neighbor, and we got invited over for dinner. And I think she was working for Google or Facebook or something like that. And I don't remember exactly what she did for the company, but I was digging for an answer that I thought I knew the answer to. But I wanted to hear somebody else say it. But what I was getting at is, why are there wars? Why do people fight? And it's because we think we're cooler than somebody else. And we want their land, or we want their stuff, or whatever. And that's terrible. But why else do wars exist? And then, but there's also a gender situation. Obviously, guys tend to be a bit more macho, and for a while they were the hunters, and the women took care of the men. Obviously, things have changed, and changed for the better.
Hey, buddy.
And at this point, we could just keep everybody a little bit more calmed down. Hi, guys.
Absolutely. So they can't hear you because I got the earbuds on, but I think that is a great place to finish up. You guys can wave and say hi. And I really appreciate you jumping on this and taking the time today. And it's been very insightful. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. I really enjoyed it. I look forward to another session.